The smoke alarms were already screaming when Danny Brooks hit the floor. He couldn't see the exit signs anymore. Just a thick black wall where the front doors of the Riverbend Community Center used to be. "Crawl," he yelled, his voice raw. "Stay low and follow my hand." Tiny hands grabbed the back of his shirt. Someone coughed so hard it sounded like they might break. Sprinklers hissed overhead, but the fire in the east hallway was still roaring, eating its way toward the gym. Beside him, a German shepherd in a bright orange vest moved through the smoke like it knew the building better than any architect. Ranger barked twice, sharp and urgent, then veered left. At Danny's hip, 13-year-old Mason clung to the dog's harness with one hand and the strap of his leg brace with the other, his whole body shaking but still moving. "Ranger knows the way," Danny shouted. "Mason, talk to them. They'll listen to you." The boy's voice almost never came when the room was quiet. Now, with flames chewing through drywall and kids crying in the dark, it ripped out of him like it had been waiting for this exact second. "Hold his vest!" Mason yelled, hoarse but clear. "Don't let go of the dog." Behind them, the ceiling in the game room groaned. Ahead of them, Ranger pulled hard toward the emergency door that everyone, including the city inspector, had said was just for show. If that door was still chained shut, they were out of time. Before I go any further, tell me where you're listening from tonight and hit that like and subscribe button if you believe courage still matters in this world. Now to explain how a 40-year-old night custodian ended up leading a line of terrified kids through a burning rec center with a retired search and rescue dog and a terrified boy at his side. We have to go back a few months. Most nights for Danny Brooks started the same way. Lily's pink backpack by the door, 2 plates in the sink, and a folded second-hand flyer on the table, reminding him that his late mortgage payment was not optional. He was 40, a widower, and the kind of tired that doesn't go away with sleep. By day, he stocked shelves at the grocery store on Route 7. By night, he pushed a broom through the long hallways of the Riverbend Community Center in Dayton, Ohio. The city called it a hub of community engagement. To Danny, it was the one place besides their small rented duplex where his 8-year-old daughter ever really smiled. 3 years earlier, his wife had been killed by a drunk driver on an ordinary Tuesday night. Before that, Danny had been a firefighter and K-9 search and rescue trainer, the guy who ran into burning buildings when everyone else backed away. One collapsed staircase and a crushed knee. Later, he was medically retired and quietly replaced. The department sent a plaque. The city moved on. He didn't. What he kept against doctors' recommendations and city policy was Ranger. Ranger had once been the lead dog on Danny's search team. Now, the shepherd was technically just a pet, though anyone watching the way he scanned every room knew better. On slow nights when nobody was watching, Danny would bring Ranger in on his shift. The building supervisor pretended not to see. Having a dog there made everyone feel safer. That was how Danny first noticed Mason. A skinny, pale kid who always sat alone in the corner of the after-school room, headphones on, eyes fixed on the floor. He had a brace on his left leg and a stiffness in his movements that made stairs a negotiation. Most adults talked around him, not to him. The only person who ever hovered was his grandmother, Doris King, the center's director, and the kind of woman who could stare down a city council with one raised eyebrow. One rainy Tuesday, Ranger slipped his leash and padded straight over to the boy, dropping an old tennis ball at his feet. Mason froze, then slowly reached down. For the first time since Danny had started there, he heard the kid whisper one word. Throw it became their little ritual. When the after-school staff turned off the lights and parents rushed their kids out, Mason would linger at the doorway, eyes flicking to Ranger. And on the nights Doris had to stay late in her office, fighting with the city over budget cuts, she'd let him stay in the gym, just until I finished this call. One night, Danny set up a simple obstacle course of cones and foam mats, just like he used to do for beginning K9 teams. He showed Mason how to give Ranger hand signals, how to direct him around barriers, how to trust the dog to lead. The boy's laugh echoed off the empty bleachers, bright and surprised, and something in Danny's chest unclenched for the first time in years. That joy lasted exactly 3 weeks. Because the night the city budget director decided to drop by unannounced, he opened the gym doors and found a retired rescue dog weaving through cones, a disabled boy shouting commands, and a limping janitor in a faded fire department t-shirt cheering them on like it was the Olympics. The man's face hardened. Doris's went pale. And Danny knew before anyone said a word that this little pocket of healing had just become a problem. The budget director didn't yell. That would have been easier. Instead, he pinched the bridge of his nose like the sight of Danny, Mason, and Ranger was some sort of personal inconvenience. A smudge on his tidy schedule. The kind of thing he expected someone else to handle so he could stay above the mess. "Is this normal?" he said to Doris, as though Danny weren't standing right there. Doris's jaw tightened. "They're supervised. It's harmless." The man's eyes flicked to Danny's knee brace, then to Mason's leg brace, then to Ranger's vest. A silent calculation passed across his face. Liability risk, paperwork cost. "Harmless isn't the standard," he murmured. Then he snapped a picture with his phone. That was the beginning. The next evening, a memo went out to all staff: unauthorized activities in community spaces are grounds for disciplinary action. No names, no specifics. But the message was clear enough. By Monday, Danny felt eyes following him everywhere. The after-school counselors, usually friendly, stiffened when he walked in with his mop bucket. The fitness instructor nodded, but looked away fast. Even the front desk clerk, who used to slide leftover cookies to Ranger, suddenly announced no pets allowed after office hours, as though she'd just discovered the rule for the first time. Danny didn't argue. He just nodded and kept moving Ranger, trotting beside him with a soft whine that sounded like he understood more than he should. In the corner of the lobby, Mason watched all of it with his shoulders pulled tight toward his ears. He didn't say anything. He just traced slow circles with his sneaker on the tile floor, pretending not to notice the shift. That night, when Danny took Ranger out for their usual walk around the building perimeter, a security guard he'd never seen before stepped in front of him. "No dogs on campus after 8 unless they're certified for active duty," the guard said, resting a hand on his belt, like Danny might bolt if he didn't. Danny kept his voice calm. "He's a retired search dog. Safe as they come." "Safe isn't the standard," the guard replied, echoing the budget director word for word. Danny walked Ranger to the sidewalk and sat with him on the curb, letting the humiliation settle. He thought of the plaque boxed up in his hall closet, his commendation for pulling 2 kids from a duplex fire the year before his accident. Funny how a piece of wood and metal meant nothing once the world decided you weren't useful anymore. When he let Ranger back in through the public entrance, the dog stuck close tail low, sensing the tension. Inside the hallway, lights buzzed overhead. Doris stepped out of her office with a folder clutched to her chest. She looked like she hadn't slept. "They're talking suspension," she whispered. "They're saying you violated safety policies, and that you influenced a disabled minor without parental consent." Her voice broke on the last words. Danny didn't flinch, but something inside him folded in on itself. He'd spent years learning how to stay composed when the world came apart. Flood rescues, house fires, car wrecks. But hearing himself described like a danger, like someone who took advantage of a child, that hit different. "I didn't push him," Danny said quietly. "He came to me. Ranger just saw him." "I know," Doris said, eyes bright with frustration. "But this is politics now. Liability budget's image. People twist anything if it gives them cover to cut a program." He nodded once, slow, heavy. "And Mason?" he asked. A shadow crossed her face. "He thinks this is his fault." That was the part that cut deepest. Later that night, Danny found Mason tucked against the back wall of the gym hoodie, pulled up, Ranger pressed protectively against his side. The boy didn't look up. "I heard them talking," he said finally. "They think you're bad." Danny kneeled, careful with the knee that still clicked on humid days. "Hey, look at me." Mason did reluctantly. "You didn't do anything wrong," Danny said. "You hear me? Nothing. But you'll get fired. I don't know what'll happen. But that's on them, not you." The boy wiped his nose with his sleeve. "She said I shouldn't get attached. Grandma did. She said it'd hurt more." Danny swallowed hard. Because he knew exactly what that meant. He'd lived that lesson himself. Ranger nudged the boy's elbow until Mason rested a hand on the dog's head. Somehow that calmed them both. "We'll figure it out," Danny promised, though he wasn't sure how. By Wednesday morning, everything tightened. A notice appeared on the staff bulletin board, Internal Review, Custodial Conduct. 2 clipped paragraphs. Cold language. On his shift that night, Danny found his cart moved from its usual place, shoved behind the boiler room, like someone wanted him out of sight. The break room suddenly got very quiet every time he walked through. Tools he'd used for years vanished, replaced with older, worn-out versions that slowed the job down. Then came the comment. He was emptying a trash can in the administrative wing when he overheard 2 staffers from the budget office talking by the copier. One snorted. "I don't know why we let people like him get so comfortable. Custodial staff should clean, not insert themselves into vulnerable kids' lives." The other whispered back, "Well, you know how it is. Some folks can't accept when their glory days are over. Gotta play the hero somewhere." They laughed. Danny kept his head down, the old training kicking. In slow breath out. Stay focused. He wheeled the cart away without a word, but Ranger, waiting by the service door, caught the tension and leaned against his leg. That same night, when he picked up Lily from his neighbor's apartment after his shift, she looked up at him with big, worried eyes. "Daddy," she whispered, "are we gonna have to move? Kids always know. They always overhear something." He kneeled and kissed her forehead. "No, we're okay." But when she hugged him, her little hands clinging to the back of his jacket, he stayed frozen for a second too long. She pulled back, searching his face. "You're scared?" He didn't answer. Didn't have to. She hugged him again. The pressure built through the rest of the week. Doris called him into her office with a red face and trembling fingers. "They're bringing in someone from the city to evaluate all after-hours access," she said. "They're implying you put the building at risk." "And Mason's mother." "Mason's mother," Danny repeated. Doris hesitated. She called. Said she heard rumors. She asked if her son was safe with you. Danny felt the ground shift under him. Not from shock, he was long past shock, but from the way those words scraped something raw inside. Safe. That was all he'd ever wanted to be, for his team, for his daughter, for anyone who needed him. He thanked Doris and stepped out of her office. Ranger nudged his knee, sensing his pulse spike. He steadied himself against the wall. He had been a trained first responder for almost 15 years. He'd crawled into collapsed structures, hauled strangers out of floodwater, carried children down smoke-choked stairs. And now people looked at him like he was a threat. He pushed through the rest of his shift with mechanical precision, each movement stripped of emotion. By the time he finished disinfecting the locker rooms and mopping the hall outside the senior center, his shoulders felt weighted with sandbags. Near midnight, he paused outside the darkened gym. Mason sat alone on the bleacher's backpack beside him, staring at the exit as though he were waiting for someone. Danny crossed the gym. The boy didn't look up, but his voice was small and cracked. "Grandma says I'm not supposed to be around you until the meeting." Danny sat beside him, leaving space. "She's just scared. That's all." "I didn't want this," Mason whispered. "I didn't ask for anything. I just wanted to feel brave." Danny's throat tightened. "You are brave," he said. "Braver than most adults I know." The boy's breath shuddered. "Can you promise you won't get fired?" Danny didn't answer. He couldn't lie to him. Ranger pressed his head into the boy's lap. They sat there for almost 10 minutes, silence breathing a retired rescue dog, offering comfort the only way he knew how. Just as Danny stood to walk back to his cart, the door at the far end of the gym swung open. The budget director, 2 members of the city compliance team, clipboards in hand, faces blank as winter concrete. The man's voice echoed through the empty space. "Mr. Brooks, you need to come with us." Mason flinched. Ranger growled a low, simmering note Danny had never heard from him in a building before. Danny lifted a hand, steadying the dog. He stepped forward. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Shadows stretched long across the polished hardwood. And as he crossed the center of the gym toward the group waiting for him, Danny Brooks knew deep in the same quiet place where instincts lived that something big was coming. Something he couldn't avoid. And something he would not walk away from. They led Danny down the hallway like a man being escorted off a job site, though nobody said the word termination. Not yet. The budget director strode ahead, the 2 compliance officers behind him, clipboards tucked under their arms like shields. Every fluorescent light hummed louder than the last. Ranger stayed at Danny's heel, tense ears pinned body low like he sensed something coming. When they reached the administrative wing, the air smelled wrong. A faint burning. Electrical, hot plastic, and dust. One of the compliance officers wrinkled her nose. "Do you smell that? The budget director didn't slow? Probably a blown fuse. Maintenance will handle it." But Danny stopped. Every muscle sharpened. He knew that smell the way a sailor knows the ocean. It wasn't a fuse. It was wiring overheating behind a wall. "Hold up," he said. The director whipped around. "Mr. Brooks, this is not the time." Danny pressed his palm to the wall. "Warm. Too warm." His pulse jumped. "Something's burning behind here. You need to evacuate this wing." The director scoffed. "Don't be dramatic." The lights flickered. A pop cracked inside the wall, sharp, violent, followed by a low grind of something electrical failing. Ranger barked, teeth-bared stance locked toward the ceiling like he saw the danger before humans could. Danny moved without thinking. Everyone out, now. The compliance officers hesitated. The director did not. He stepped toward Danny with the entitled confidence of a man who never had to listen to someone like him. "You're not in charge here." That's when the ceiling tile above them sagged, only half an inch. But Danny had seen that sag before, seconds before a ceiling caves. He shoved the nearest officer out of the way just as the tile burst open and a sheet of flame rolled out of the ductwork like a living thing. The hallway screamed with heat. "Go," Danny roared. Fire in the ventilation. The alarm hadn't tripped yet. It wouldn't. Fires inside ductwork almost never hit the first detectors. But once the oxygen hit, the director stood frozen. Ranger lunged, teeth catching the cuff of the man's blazer, yanking him backward as a second tile blew, sparks raining down. Danny grabbed the director's collar and dragged him toward the stairwell. This was more than a blown fuse. Something electrical had been overheating for hours. And this wing, where the after-school kids dropped off their backpacks, where seniors gathered every morning, didn't have fire suppression in the ducts. The city had cut that budget 5 years earlier. "Move!" Danny shouted. "Sprinklers won't catch this. Get downstairs and start clearing rooms." Now. The officers ran. The budget director choked on smoke. "To the main hall, there are kids in there tonight." Danny's stomach dropped. Mason. His grandmother had a weekly workshop that ran late. Kids working on homework. Parents still in the parking lot. Without a word, he bolted toward the central lobby, Ranger sprinting just ahead. As they rounded the corner, a blast of heat shoved them backward. Smoke curled through the hallway. Lights flickered again and died, plunging the rec center into a dim, pulsing glow from the exit signs. Shadows moved inside the main hall, silhouettes of children, teens, staff. Voices rising. Panic building. The fire was racing through the ductwork like a fuse toward the gym, and community room spaces filled with people who wouldn't know where the safe exits were. People who would run the wrong direction. People who couldn't run at all. Danny's knee throbbed, threatening to lock, but he pushed forward, using the wall to steady himself. Ranger barked sharply, twice his old signal for danger close. Danny threw open the doors to the main hall. Chaos. Smoke spilling down from the vents. Dozens of kids coughing, some crying. A handful of staff waving people toward a single doorway, one he knew led directly to the east corridor, which was already filling with smoke. "Wrong exit," Danny shouted. His voice cut through the panic like a knife. Every head turned. He pointed toward the opposite side of the room. "Use the emergency doors by the craft room. Those vents aren't connected to this fire line," one counselor yelled back. "Those doors are chained. They've been broken for months." Danny's gut clenched. He knew it was true. The city had been meaning to replace the crash bars for ages, but the work order kept getting bumped. The kids surged the wrong direction toward the smoky east door. Someone fell. A cluster of younger children started crying harder. Ranger Danny barked. The shepherd leapt onto a table, tail straight chest, puffed, barking loud enough to shake the air. Heads whipped his way. The kids closest paused. Mason Danny shouted, "Where is he?" A small voice answered from near the wall. "Here." Mason stood rigid, one hand gripping his brace, the other pressed to the wall to stay upright. Smoke thickened. Danny pushed through the crowd, grabbed the boy's hand and crouched to meet his eyes. "I need your voice," Danny said. "Can you give commands?" Mason's chest heaved. I don't know." "Yes, you do." The boy sucked a shaky breath. Danny lifted Ranger's vest handle, placing it in Mason's hand. A tremor went through the kid's shoulders. Danny felt it and recognized it. Fear. Self-doubt. The same freeze Danny had seen in firefighters their first time inside the burn tower. "Look at me," he said quietly. "You're not alone." Something flickered in Mason's eyes, a small, stubborn spark. He nodded. "Tell Ranger to lead," Danny said. Mason swallowed. Then voice cracking, but loud enough, "Ranger, go forward!" Ranger barked and jumped down, weaving through the crowd toward the chained emergency doors. The kids followed. The sight was surreal, dozens of scared children trailing a dog who once saved lives in real disasters, now guiding them through a smoky hall like he'd been waiting for this. Danny limped after them, using the wall for support, heat building behind them like a chasing wave. When Ranger reached the chained side doors, he pawed them, barking frantically. Mason reached the handle and tugged. Nothing. The chain clanked. The counselor behind him moaned, "We're trapped." Kids started crying again. Danny shoved through his knee, screaming. "Back up," he ordered. He wrapped both hands around the chain and yanked. It didn't budge. He yanked again. His knee nearly gave. The memory hit him hard. An apartment stairwell collapsing under him, his leg twisting, his career ending. Not again. Not this time. He pressed his forehead to the cold metal door frame, eyes squeezed shut. In the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw Lily, her backpack by the door, her little hands tucked under his chin when nightmares pulled her awake. Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's the decision to keep moving because someone needs you. He exhaled hard. Then he looked down. The hinge bolts. Old. Rust creeping around the edges. Not meant to withstand force from the inside. He stepped back. "Mason," he said, "tell everyone to move away from the door." The boy raised both hands, shouting louder than Danny had ever heard, "Everyone back up." "Move back." Kids shuffled rearward. Danny planted his good foot, braced his bad knee against the floor, and drove his shoulder into the hinge side of the door as hard as he could. The first hit rattled the frame. The second hit loosened the lowest bolt. The third hit nearly dropped him, but the middle bolt snapped with a metallic ping. A counselor gasped. Someone whispered, "Come on, come on!" Danny roared and slammed his weight one last time. The door ripped free of the bottom hinge, swung outward with a shriek of metal, and cold night air rushed in like salvation. "Go!" Danny shouted. "Get them out!" Ranger bounded through the opening, barking kids forward. Counselors herded the group across the parking lot toward safety. Danny stayed behind until the last two teenagers made it through. Smoke burst from the vent above, rolling down like a curtain. He ducked out just as a tongue of flame reached the doorway. The cool night air hit him so fast he staggered. Fire engines wailed in the distance. Someone had finally pulled the alarm. Parents sprinted from cars. Counselors guided kids toward the far sidewalk. The community center director shouted orders into her phone, and Mason, shaking coughing face streaked with smoke, stood at Danny's knee, with Ranger pressed to his side. The boy whispered, "You saved them." Danny shook his head, chest burning. "You did." Before Danny could say more, the budget director stumbled out of the building, suit jacket torn, coughing violently. He stared at Danny like he was looking at a ghost. You knew," the man rasped. "How did you know the ducts were—" Danny didn't answer. Because across the lot, headlights cut through the smoke. Lily's babysitter's car. She jumped out, eyes wide, hair wild from sleep. "I saw the fire on the news. Lily's in the back." The little girl ran toward him, arms open, tears boiling out before she even reached him. "Daddy." He caught her, lifting her with one arm despite the pain slicing through his knee. She clung to him like she would never let go. Behind them, firefighters surged into the building. Sirens echoed. Parents cried. Counselors embraced children. But one thing was unmistakable. Dozens of people had just witnessed a man they'd dismissed, doubted, and nearly suspended do the one thing nobody else there could have done. He'd saved them. All of them. The power dynamic shifted in a single breath, and every person watching knew nothing about Danny Brooks was small. Nothing about him was replaceable. And nothing about him was ever going to be the same again. The smoke still hung over the parking lot like a low gray ceiling when the last of the kids were accounted for. Fire trucks crowded the curb, their lights washing the building in frantic red and blue. Parents clutched their children, counselors sobbed into one another's shoulders. and the night just minutes earlier, calm and ordinary, felt cracked open. Danny stood near the ambulance with Lily in his arms, and Ranger pressed against his leg like a shadow that refused to leave. Mason hovered close by, wrapped in a silver emergency blanket, cheeks streaked with soot, but eyes bright and wide. The boy didn't look scared anymore. He looked proud. The same couldn't be said for the people filing toward Danny in a slow, stunned wave. The compliance officers approached first. Neither one spoke. One just stared at him like she was relearning his face. The other glanced at the chain-scarred emergency door, then back at him, swallowing hard. Then came the budget director. His suit jacket hung lopsided from where Ranger had yanked it. His hair was singed at the ends. His face, normally stiff, unreadable, now looked pale and unsteady, like a man who'd seen something he didn't have the language for. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For once, silence was the only honest thing he had to offer. Doris, still on her phone with the fire chief, caught Danny's eye. Her lips trembled with a mixture of relief and something like heartbreak. "They said, if you hadn't known what you did, that fire would have run the whole ventilation line," she said breathlessly. The ducts were pulling flames straight toward the gym. "They said we had..." She wiped her forehead. 5 minutes, maybe. Parents turned to stare. Teenagers who'd been joking about him earlier that week now watched him like he was someone from a different world. Danny shifted Lily to his other arm, trying not to wince when his knee locked for a second. He forced himself to stay still, calm, steady, even though his lungs still burned, and his heartbeat was refusing to slow down. He wasn't used to eyes on him anymore. Not like this. Not with awe instead of condescension. A firefighter walked over, helmet tucked under his arm, soot streaking his turnout coat. His name tag read Sweeney. "You the one who got those kids out?" the firefighter asked. Danny nodded once. Sweeney let out a long breath. "You did everything right. Duct fires are hell. Most people don't even know how they start, let alone how fast they move." Something flickered in his expression. Recognition. "You worked the job before he asked." Danny hesitated. He hadn't planned on talking about that part of his life ever again. Not publicly, not here, not in front of Lily, not in front of Mason, not in front of the same people who'd been whispering about him all week. But smoke still curled above the broken doorway, and kids were alive because of choices he'd made on instinct. And maybe he thought the truth had been waiting for this exact moment. "Yeah," Danny said quietly. "I was fire and rescue. Search and rescue K-9 team lead. 14 years. One of the compliance officers blinked in confusion. You were fire and rescue." The budget director looked like someone had hit him with cold water when the second officer asked. "Before my injury," Danny answered, tapping his knee brace. "Ranger was my partner." Ranger, hearing his name, nudged Danny's handtail, giving a single soft thump. The firefighter's eyes widened. "Brooks. Brooks. Daniel Brooks." His voice softened, dipping with recognition. "You're the one who pulled that woman out of the North Creek duplex fire. I remember the report. They said you went in twice." Danny shifted, uncomfortable. "We had to. Her kid was hiding under the stairs." "Jesus," Sweeney whispered. "You shouldn't be mopping floors, not after that." The words fell into the night with a weight nothing else had carried so far. A counselor gasped. Two parents exchanged stunned looks. Someone whispered, "He was a first responder." Another. All this time, Danny felt his shoulders tighten. Not from embarrassment, but from old instinct pulling him into himself. He didn't want applause. He didn't want attention. He wanted the kids safe. That was enough. But Mason stepped forward before anyone else could speak. "He saved us," the boy said, voice loud and clear. "He told me what to say." Ranger listened. "Everybody followed us because of him." Danny's throat tightened. The kid who barely whispered most days was standing up for him when he shouldn't have to. Lily tugged on Danny's shirt, her eyes soft but sure. "Daddy always helps people." The budget director closed his eyes. Then he did something nobody expected. He walked toward Danny, not with authority, not with condescension, but slowly, like a man approaching a truth he wasn't prepared for. "Mr. Brooks," he began, voice gravelly. "I owe you an apology." Danny didn't respond. The man swallowed. "I misjudged you. Horribly. I saw a job title, not a person. And certainly not someone who could do what you just did." A small crowd gathered, hanging on every word. The director forced himself to continue. "I shouldn't have ignored your warnings, or your instincts, and I shouldn't have treated you the way I did this week." A ripple of discomfort traveled through the administrative staff standing behind him. Shame, recognition, awkwardness, all the things that show up only when truth finally forces itself into the open. Sweeney cleared his throat, pulling a charred piece of duct insulation from the structure. "City inspector's going to have a field day with this. This kind of failure doesn't happen overnight. It's been building for months." Everyone turned to the budget director. He blanched. Doris stepped forward, then voice steady, gaze sharp. "We've been asking for duct inspection funding for 2 years. 2. She gestured toward the burned doorway. "This is what budget cuts look like." The director's jaw clenched, but he didn't argue. "I understand. And yes, I will be reporting that." Then he looked at Danny again. "There will be a formal commendation," he said. "From the city, from the center, from all of us." Danny exhaled slowly. "That's not necessary." "It is," the director answered. And more than that, he hesitated. Everyone leaned in. "You shouldn't be working as a night custodian." Doris's eyebrows shot up. Danny stiffened. The director continued carefully. "The community center is expanding its safety and emergency response programs next quarter. We're establishing a full-time safety coordinator role, someone with experience in evacuation planning, emergency drills, structural risk assessment." He gestured around them toward the injured building, the crowd of shaken families. "Someone like you," he finished. The words hung there, unreal. Danny blinked, stunned. Because no one had offered him anything resembling opportunity in years, certainly not after the accident, certainly not after he lost who he thought he was. Lily squeezed him tighter like she could feel the shift. But before Danny could respond, Mason's mother rushed up, eyes red, breath hitching. She pulled her son into her arms, trembling. "I heard what happened," she said to Danny, voice breaking. "I was wrong about you. I'm so sorry. I doubted." Danny shook his head gently. "He's a good kid. He just needed space to be brave." She covered her mouth with a shaking hand. "Brave. He led those kids out because of what you taught him." Her gaze softened, full of something fragile and grateful. "Thank you for saving my son, for seeing him." That hit harder than anything else. He lowered Lily to the ground. Ranger pressed against his knee, grounding him. People gathered closer, parents, counselors, the compliance officers, the firefighter, even staff who had avoided him earlier in the week. They formed an unspoken circle around him, the air thick with something between reverence and remorse. The budget director cleared his throat again. "Mr. Brooks," he said, voice firm now. "The position is yours if you want it. Full salary. Benefits. Your expertise could prevent disasters like this." Danny looked down at his knee brace, at the burned doorway, at Mason and Lily standing close together like they'd known each other forever. He hadn't thought about responsibility of that scale in years. He hadn't let himself want anything beyond surviving each month. And yet, he felt it. The faint hum of something waking up inside him. Purpose. Direction. The sense that he wasn't done being useful, not by a long shot. Ranger nudged him again. Danny nodded slowly. "I need some time to think." "You'll have it," the director said immediately. The firefighter stepped forward, then extending his hand. "For what it's worth, Brooks, this city still remembers you. Tonight just reminded us why." Danny took the handshake. Smoke curled into the sky. Sirens faded. Kids clung to their parents. The building hissed with dying heat. And right there, surrounded by the people who had once dismissed him, Danny Brooks felt the world tilt. Not in the way it had the day his life collapsed, but in the way it does when life finally opens its doors again. And on the other side of that door, something new waited. In the days that followed, the community center felt different, quieter at first, as though everyone was still trying to understand what had happened. But slowly, a new current moved through the halls. Staff who used to nod and hurry past now stopped Danny just to say thank you. Parents brought casseroles and handwritten notes. Even teenagers who'd barely noticed him before offered awkward high fives in the lobby. The budget director, normally glued to spreadsheets, walked the building in person every morning. He met with Doris, the fire chief, and the city inspector about emergency funding, structural repairs, and new safety protocols. And every time he passed Danny, he paused not to evaluate, not to criticize, but to listen. The compliance officers filed their reports too, but theirs told a different story. The janitor, whose actions prevented mass injury. The retired search and rescue specialist, who recognized a silent, deadly fire pattern. The man whose quick thinking saved dozens. The city council read it. The county read it. Half the town read it. Even Mason's mother, who had once questioned Danny's influence, showed up with her son the following week. She took Danny aside, hands trembling. "I should have trusted him," she said. "He talks about you like you gave him a voice he didn't know he had." Danny didn't know how to respond to that. So she reached up and squeezed his hand the way mothers do, when words aren't enough. That same afternoon, Ranger, who had become something of a celebrity, trotted around with a brand new vest stitched by one of the senior quilting groups. It had his name embroidered in blue and a small patch that read, "Hero of Riverbend." Danny didn't know whether to laugh or cry. By the third week, the safety coordinator job was finalized. A real offer. Real salary. Real benefits. Real purpose. Doris delivered the paperwork herself, smiling like she'd been waiting years for the center to get its priorities straight. "Danny," she said, sliding the folder across the table. "We need someone who understands danger before it turns into a headline. Someone who can train staff, teach kids, prepare this place for whatever comes next." He looked down at the folder, at the printed title, at the responsibilities he hadn't imagined carrying again. "You don't have to decide today," she added. "But this isn't just a job. It's a place for someone who still believes in showing up for people." He thought about it that night as he tucked Lily into bed. She lay curled beneath her blanket, Ranger stretched out at her feet like a furry guardian. Before she drifted off, she whispered, "Daddy, you helped everybody. You should do that more. Sometimes clarity comes from the smallest voices." He took the job in the morning. 3 months later, the Riverbend Community Center held a reopening ceremony for the repaired wing. The mayor gave a speech. The fire chief shook Danny's hand in front of the crowd. The city council unveiled a plaque near the new emergency exit. It read, in honor of the courage that saved our community. Danny didn't stand near it. He stood with Lily and Mason, both of them leaning into Ranger, who watched the crowd with alert, happy eyes. The boy had grown since the fire, less withdrawn, more confident a leader among the after-school kids now. His mother credited Danny, but Danny always shook his head and told her the truth. The bravery was already there. He just needed someone to believe it. And the center changed too. Not in flashy, dramatic ways, in quieter ones. Every classroom got evacuation maps designed by Danny. Every staff member learned how to guide children with varied needs. Every month, Danny ran drills, some simple, some complex. And Mason stood beside him during each one, Ranger at his side, demonstrating hand signals to the younger kids. Lily joined too proudly, wearing a little badge she made herself Junior Safety Helper. On the anniversary of the fire, the community center hosted a small gathering. No speeches, no big ceremony, just families sharing coffee and stories. One father approached Danny close to closing time. "My daughter still has nightmares," he said. "But when we talk about that night, she always says the same thing. The man with the dog knew what to do." "Thank you." Danny nodded, unable to say anything for a moment. Later, as he walked Lily and Mason out to the parking lot, the sky was deep blue, the kind of blue that made the streetlights look like stars. Ranger trotted ahead, tail wagging, sniffing the cool air. "This place feels safer now," Mason said quietly. "It is," Danny replied. "Because of you." Danny looked at the two kids, his daughter holding the boy's hand without hesitation, Ranger circling them protectively, and something inside him finally settled. He hadn't just returned to who he was. He had grown into who he was supposed to become. A protector, a guide, a father doing his best, a man who refused to let his past be the end of his story. As they reached the car, Lily tugged his sleeve. "Daddy." "Yeah, sweetheart. Are you proud now?" He knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Yeah," he said softly. "I think I finally am." The wind stirred the trees overhead. The building behind them glowed warm against the night, and the man who once swept its floors now guarded its future. Because sometimes life doesn't give you back what you lost. Sometimes it gives you something quieter, deeper, and more enduring. A second chance to matter. And for people like Danny Brooks, that's all the courage in the world ever needed.